The fluorescent lights flickered in the oncology wing of St. Luke's Hospital as Hannah Wilson pushed her cleaning cart down the empty corridor. The wheels squeaked against the polished floor, mixing with the distant echoes of hospital announcements and the steady hum of medical equipment. At 35, Hannah had cleaned these halls for 7 years, memorizing every corner, every room, and every face that hung in the family photos on Dr. Matthews' desk. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows, creating patterns on the walls she had wiped countless times before. The antiseptic smell clung to her uniform as she entered Dr. Matthews' office, her movements automatic after years of routine. The metal cart felt particularly cold against her hands that day, its familiar touch grounding her in the monotony of her work. She moved methodically around the room, dusting the frames that held smiling faces of the doctor's perfect family, vacation photos, graduation ceremonies, birthday parties. While reaching for a high shelf, her elbow caught the edge of a manila folder. Papers scattered across the freshly mopped floor, their clinical white stark against the pale blue tiles. As she gathered them, a name jumped out from the medical charts, her own. Her hands trembled as her eyes scanned the document, medical terminology be blurring, except for the essential facts: advanced stage, aggressive progression, 8 months. The weight of the diagnosis pressed against her chest as she stumbled backward, the papers still clutched in her shaking hands. The supply closet became her refuge, its narrow confines witnessing her silent breakdown among mops and cleaning supplies. The sharp scent of bleach burned her nostrils as she struggled to breathe, her mind racing to her daughter Julie, waiting at home with homework spread across their small kitchen table. Dr. Matthews found her there 20 minutes later, the medical file still in her grip. His face shifted from surprise to recognition to professional concern. The conversation that followed felt surreal, like watching someone else's life unfold through a foggy window. Clinical terms, treatment options, and survival rates floated in the space between them, but all Hannah could think about was Julie's upcoming science project, the rent due next week, and the college fund that had barely reached 3 figures. The evening air had grown cool by the time Hannah left the hospital, her uniform still crisp, but her world completely altered. The city buses continued their routes, people walked their dogs, and teenagers laughed at bus stops, all oblivious to how the universe had shifted within the sterile walls of St. Luke's Hospital. In her pocket, a crumpled prescription paper bore witness to her new reality. Above, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, indifferent to the fact that Hannah Wilson had just become a dying woman with an expiration date, a single mother with 8 months to secure her daughter's future, and a keeper of a secret that would shatter her small family's world. The weight of single motherhood, once familiar, now felt crushing. Each step toward the bus stop marked time she could no longer take for granted. Behind her, the hospital's lights continued to flicker, and somewhere inside, her cleaning cart stood abandoned, a silent testament to the life she had lived until this day, and the one she would have to face tomorrow. The city never truly slept, its distant hum seeping through the thin walls of Hannah's 2-bedroom apartment. At midnight, the creaking floorboards beneath her feet betrayed every step as she made her way to her closet, careful not to wake Julie in the adjacent room. The cardboard box had sat untouched on the highest shelf for 15 years, gathering dust and holding secrets. Hannah had to stand on a chair to reach it, the furniture protesting under her weight. The box felt heavier than she remembered, weighted down with memories she had tried to forget. Sitting cross-legged on her bedroom floor, Hannah lifted the lid. The musty scent of preserved paper escaped, carrying with it fragments of a different life. Beneath old receipts and faded photographs, she found them, Richard's letters, their edges worn soft from the times she had read them before hiding them away. The yellow pages bore his distinctive handwriting, the blue ink now faded to a ghostly gray. College memories flooded back as she unfolded the first letter. Richard Bennett, with his economics textbooks and ambitious dreams, had been so different from the other students at the state university. Their romance had bloomed in the library, where Hannah worked part-time shelving books. His family's wealth had meant nothing then, in their shared world of coffee shops and used bookstores. The letters tracked their relationship's evolution, from passionate declarations to increasingly desperate attempts at explanation. The final letter, dated 3 months after he had left, remained unopened. Hannah had been 2 months pregnant when she received it, her decision already made. Through her bedroom wall, she could hear Julie's soft breathing. Their small apartment held 15 years of mother-daughter memories. First steps captured in cheap photo frames, school certificates pinned to the refrigerator, a collection of second-hand books carefully arranged on makeshift shelves. Every sacrifice, every extra shift, every missed opportunity had been for Julie. Dawn crept through the window, painting the walls in pale light. Hannah had arranged the letters in chronological order on her bed, creating a timeline of what was lost. The last unopened letter lay separate from the others, its sealed envelope a testament to choices made and paths not taken. In the kitchen, the coffee maker sputtered to life, its automatic timer marking the start of another day. Julie would wake soon, asking about college applications and summer job prospects. Their morning routine had always been a dance of careful optimism, of plans made within the bounds of their limited means. The diagnosis had changed everything. 8 months suddenly seemed like nothing. Not enough time to secure Julie's future, not enough time to explain 15 years of silence, not enough time to bridge the gap between their small world and Richard's life of corporate success. Hannah gathered the letters, holding them against her chest. Through the window, the city had begun to stir, traffic sounds growing stronger. The weight of the unopened letter seemed to burn through all the others. In the growing morning light, the choice she had made at 20 seemed to blur with the choice she faced now. The sound of Julie's alarm clock filtered through the wall. Hannah returned the letters to their box, except for one, Richard's business card, found through a late-night internet search, which she placed in her wallet. The morning would bring questions about college funds and future plans. For now, Hannah tucked the box away, carrying the weight of her secrets back to the highest shelf, where they would wait until she found the courage to shatter the careful life she had built. The internet cafe sat wedged between a discount store and a pawn shop, its neon sign flickering weakly against the shadows of downtown's gleaming skyscrapers. Hannah had chosen this location deliberately, far enough from her usual haunts that no one would recognize her, yet close enough to the business district to serve her purpose. The blast of cold air conditioning hit her as she entered, carrying the scent of stale coffee and electronic equipment. Sarah, the young barista with purple-streaked hair, barely glanced up from her phone as Hannah paid for an hour of computer time. The clicking of keyboards and murmur of voices created a cocoon of anonymity around her chosen terminal in the corner. Richard Bennett's name yielded thousands of results. His success had left digital footprints everywhere: newspaper articles, business journals, charity galas. The screen reflected Hannah's face as she scrolled through images of Richard in tailored suits, shaking hands with politicians and cutting ribbons at corporate events. His wedding to Catherine Ashworth, daughter of a banking dynasty, had made the society pages 7 years ago. The coffee in Hannah's paper cup grew cold as she absorbed the details of Richard's life. His company had expanded across 3 continents. The Bennett Foundation funded scholarships at prestigious universities, institutions that Julie could never hope to attend on a cleaning lady's salary. Each new tab opened revealed another facet of the life that could have been, should have been, part of Julie's inheritance. Through the cafe's grimy window, Hannah watched luxury cars glide past, their polished surfaces reflecting the midday sun. One sleek black vehicle slowed near the corporate building across the street, and Hannah's heart stopped. Richard emerged, older but unmistakable, his silver-streaked hair catching the light. A woman in designer clothes, Catherine, stepped out after him, followed by 2 children in private school uniforms. Hannah's hands trembled as she minimized the browser windows. The distance between her world and Richard's stretched like a chasm across the street. Her reflection in the computer screen looked alien. Tired eyes, drugstore reading glasses, hair pulled back in a practical bun. She had aged 15 years. Richard had ascended 15 social classes. The attempt to enter his building proved futile. The security guard had eyed her department store clothes with practiced disdain, his polite rejection masking clear suspicion. Hannah retreated to a public bench, watching as important people streamed in and out of the revolving doors, each bearing the invisible stamps of belonging that she lacked. More research revealed the Bennett Foundation's latest project, a medical research initiative at the same hospital where Hannah mopped floors. The irony tasted bitter in her mouth. Her terminal diagnosis might benefit from the very research her daughter's father was funding, while Julie's college fund remained a sad collection of small bills in an envelope. The cafe's hour-long session expired with a mechanical beep. Hannah gathered her notes, addresses, phone numbers, email contacts, and folded them into her worn purse. Sarah had begun wiping down tables, preparing for the afternoon rush of students seeking cheap internet access.
Hey there, enjoying the story? Subscribe now, like and comment to catch all the upcoming emotions.
Outside, the temperature had risen, but Hannah felt cold. The corporate building rose before her like a fortress of glass and steel, housing a man who had once written love letters in a university library. Somewhere inside, Richard Bennett was living his carefully curated life, unaware that his past was about to collide with his present, carried by a terminal diagnosis and a daughter's unknown existence. The bus ride home would take 45 minutes. Hannah checked her watch. Julie would be finishing school soon. Time, that cruel currency she could no longer save or spend wisely, kept slipping away. The weight of the folded papers in her purse pressed against her side like a sentence or perhaps a key. Tomorrow, she decided, watching the corporate building shrink in the bus window. Tomorrow she would find a way to breach those glass walls. The maître had hesitated before leading Hannah to the private dining area of LeBlanc, his eyes lingering on her department store dress. The restaurant's elegant interior seemed designed to remind people like her that they did not belong. Crystal chandeliers caught the afternoon light, and heavy silverware gleamed on starched white tablecloths. Thomas, the waiter, had placed a leather-bound menu before her with practiced grace, though his subtle expression suggested she should consider the prices carefully. Hannah had ordered only water, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she waited. The ice clinked against the crystal glass, marking time. Richard arrived exactly 17 minutes late. His confident stride faltered when he saw her, recognition and shock bleeding through his carefully maintained executive facade. 15 years had transformed the passionate college student into this polished stranger, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Hannah's monthly rent. The silence stretched between them, filled with the soft murmur of other diners and the delicate sound of expensive cutlery against fine china. Hannah had rehearsed this moment countless times, but now the words stuck in her throat. Richard ordered scotch, neat, his manicured hands betraying a slight tremor. Her terminal diagnosis emerged first, the words falling between them like stones into still water. 8 months. The number hung in the air, transforming the expensive restaurant into just another sterile room where life and death were discussed over starched napkins. Richard's face had paled, his practiced corporate mask slipping. The revelation of Julie's existence struck harder. Hannah had watched his hands tighten around the crystal tumbler, knuckles white against the cut glass. The scotch remained untouched as she described their daughter, brilliant, ambitious, unaware of her heritage. Each detail seemed to age Richard, stripping away layers of carefully constructed success. Thomas had approached and retreated several times, reading the tension with professional discretion. The afternoon light faded outside the tall windows, casting longer shadows across their untouched place settings. In the dimming light, Hannah could almost see traces of the young man who had once written her love letters. The checkbook emerged predictably, like a shield Richard could hide behind. The number he wrote contained more zeros than Hannah had ever seen in her bank account. His fountain pen had scratched against the paper with desperate efficiency, as if he could solve this problem the same way he handled corporate acquisitions. Hannah had left the check on the table, pristine and unsigned. Her chair scraped against the hardwood floor as she stood, the sound sharp and final in the hushed atmosphere. Richard remained seated, the mask of corporate confidence completely shattered, leaving only a man confronting the consequences of choices made 15 years ago. The walk to the exit felt longer than her entire bus ride there. Other diners glanced up briefly from their expensive meals, already forgetting her presence. Thomas held the door with impeccable professionalism, though his eyes held a new respect. The evening air carried the scent of approaching rain. Behind her, through the restaurant's windows, Richard sat alone at the table, the untouched scotch and unsigned check testament to a conversation that had changed everything and nothing. Hannah's bus pass felt rough against her fingers as she retrieved it from her worn wallet. Above the city, storm clouds gathered, indifferent to the collision of worlds that had just occurred beneath them. Time ticked forward, measured now in treatments and symptoms rather than minutes and hours. Hannah had 8 months to secure Julie's future, and Richard's shock would eventually fade into decision. The rain began to fall as she waited at the bus stop, the expensive restaurant blurring behind sheets of water like a dream being washed away. The storm that had threatened all week finally broke over the city, rain drumming against the thin windows of their apartment. Julie had found the medical papers in Hannah's work bag, knocked over while searching for a permission slip. The diagnosis lay scattered across their worn linoleum floor, clinical terms stark against the white paper. Hannah had returned from her shift to find Julie sitting at their small kitchen table, the papers arranged in a neat pile before her. The room felt airless, compressed by the weight of unspoken words and approaching thunder. Julie's homework lay abandoned beside her plate of untouched dinner, growing cold under the harsh kitchen fluorescent light. The truth spilled out in fragments, each piece more devastating than the last. 8 months. Terminal. No treatment options. The words echoed off the faded wallpaper, mixing with the sound of rain against glass. Julie's face had transformed from anger to disbelief to a deep, raw pain that made her look older than her 15 years. The box of letters emerged next, pulled from its hiding place by Julie's trembling hands. Richard's words, preserved in faded ink, told a story Hannah had never wanted her daughter to know. The perfect father Julie had imagined, dead, traveling, or simply lost, dissolved into the reality of a man who had chosen to walk away. Thunder cracked outside as Julie read letter after letter, her tears falling onto the yellowed paper. Hannah watched her daughter's world reshape itself around these new truths, powerless to soften the impact. The small apartment, once their sanctuary, felt like a museum of carefully constructed lies. The first seizure struck without warning. Julie's scream pierced through the storm as Hannah collapsed in the hallway, her body betraying her sooner than the doctors had predicted. The ambulance lights painted their walls in alternating red and white, transforming their home into another sterile medical space. St. Luke's Hospital welcomed Hannah through different doors this time. Not the service entrance she had used for years, but the emergency room's sliding glass panels. Dr. Matthews had been on call, the irony not lost on either of them, as he ordered tests and medications. The beeping of monitors replaced the sound of rain, marking each precious heartbeat. Julie had refused to leave the hospital room, her small frame curled into the uncomfortable visitor's chair. The letters she had discovered lay forgotten in their apartment, but their revelations hung in the air between mother and daughter. Each beep of the heart monitor seemed to ask questions neither was ready to answer. Through the hospital window, the city lights blurred in the continuing rain. Hannah watched her daughter's face in the reflection, seeing traces of Richard in the set of her jaw, the arch of her eyebrows. The genetic heritage Julie had unknowingly carried for 15 years suddenly seemed written in every feature. The night stretched on, measured in nurses' visits and medication doses. Julie had finally fallen asleep, her hands still gripping Hannah's. The storm outside began to fade, but its echoes remained in the tension of unfinished conversations and uncertain futures. Dawn approached with the efficiency of hospital routine. Shift changes, vital sign checks, and the endless beeping created a rhythm different from their usual morning schedule. Hannah watched the ceiling tiles, counting time in heartbeats and breaths, aware that each one brought them closer to decisions that could not be postponed. The truth had unfolded. but its consequences were still taking shape. In the harsh morning light, mother and daughter faced a future neither had imagined. 8 months of borrowed time, a father's existence to reconcile, and the weight of 15 years of secrets pressing down on both their shoulders. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a sky as raw and uncertain as their new reality. The Bennett corporate tower stretched toward the morning sky, its glass exterior reflecting clouds and ambition in equal measure. Julie had worn her best clothes, a carefully ironed blouse and her only pair of dress pants, but still felt the security guard's scrutinizing gaze as she presented Hannah's letter of introduction. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor seemed endless, each floor marking another moment to question her decision. Richard's executive suite occupied the building's corner, offering panoramic views of a city Julie had only ever seen from ground level. His secretary's surprise at her appearance lasted only seconds before recognition dawned. Julie's face carried too much of Richard's genetics to be coincidental. The carefully maintained corporate calm cracked just slightly. Emma Bennett had arrived first, stepping out of Richard's private office with a coffee cup in hand. Her designer outfit and perfectly styled hair represented everything Julie's world was not. The coffee cup shattered against the marble floor as Emma's eyes moved between Julie and the family photos on the wall, connecting undeniable dots. The confrontation unfolded in Richard's office, behind closed doors and drawn blinds. Julie's prepared speech, rehearsed countless times in front of her bedroom mirror, dissolved into raw truth. Each word stripped away layers of Richard's carefully constructed reality, while Emma stood witness to the unraveling of 15 years of selective memory. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city continued its business, unaware of the seismic shifts occurring in the corner office of its tallest building. Papers lay scattered across Richard's desk, medical reports, school records, photographs that tracked Julie's life through years Richard had chosen to miss. Emma's hands trembled as she picked up a photo of Hannah from her college days, the resemblance to the woman she had glimpsed in the restaurant undeniable. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the office carpet as Emma made an unexpected choice. Her quiet strength emerged not in defense of her marriage, but in recognition of a truth larger than social embarrassment. She had pulled a chair close to Julie, her previous shock transformed into something more complex. Richard paced behind his desk, his corporate armor useless against the weight of consequence. Each step marked time between his past decisions and present responsibilities. The family photos on his wall, vacation snapshots, graduation ceremonies, carefully staged portraits, seemed to watch him with new judgment. The park across from the tower offered refuge as the office became too confining. Julie found herself walking its paths with Emma, while Richard remained behind, buried in the implications of legacy and responsibility. The carefully manicured gardens presented a stark contrast to the small patch of dirt behind Julie's apartment building that Hannah had tried to cultivate. Emma's compassion emerged not from obligation but from understanding. Her own family history, marked by similar secrets and silences, created bridges where walls might have stood. The afternoon light filtered through autumn leaves as they walked, casting patterns that seemed to mirror the complexity of their newly connected lives. Richard watched from his office window, his silhouette a dark shape against the city backdrop. His world, built on strategic decisions and calculated risks, had been upended by the arrival of a 15-year-old girl carrying his features and Hannah's quiet dignity. The weight of missed birthdays, absent father-daughter dances, and unshared moments pressed against him like an invisible tide. The day ended with no neat resolutions. Julie's return bus ticket sat unused in her pocket as Emma insisted on having her driver take her home. The Bennett Tower receded in the car's rearview mirror, its imposing height somehow diminished by the afternoon's revelations. In her hand, Julie clutched a business card with Emma's private number, an unexpected lifeline thrown across the chasm of social class and circumstance. Hannah waited at their apartment, her deteriorating health marked in the new hollows of her cheeks.
Hey there, enjoying the story? Subscribe now, like and comment to catch all the upcoming emotions.
The weight of the day's confrontations hung in Julie's shoulders as she climbed the familiar stairs. Above the city, the sun set on a day that had rebuilt the foundation of multiple lives, leaving everyone to navigate the uncertain architecture of their new reality. The hospital room had become their new center of gravity, its sterile walls containing what remained of Hannah's shrinking world. The machines tracked her decline in steady beeps and digital readouts, each day marking another step toward the inevitable. The doctors had revised their initial estimate. 8 months had become 6, then 4. Julie had arranged Hannah's few personal items on the bedside table, a worn photo album, a notebook for the letters she insisted on writing, and a small potted plant that struggled under the fluorescent lights. The room's window offered a view of the hospital parking lot, where Emma's luxury car now occupied a regular spot among the staff vehicles. Hannah's hands, once strong from years of cleaning, had grown thin enough for her hospital bracelet to slide loosely around her wrist. She spent her more lucid hours writing, her penmanship deteriorating, but her determination unchanged. Each letter represented a future moment she would miss. Julie's graduation, first heartbreak, wedding day. The growing stack of envelopes in the bedside drawer measured time in milestones rather than minutes. Richard's visits carried the weight of 15 years of absence. He stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed, his expensive suits out of place among the medical equipment. The corporate world that had consumed his life seemed increasingly insignificant against the quiet dignity of Hannah's decline. His attempts at conversation often faltered, but his presence marked a shift in the family's fractured geometry. Emma had approached the situation with unexpected grace. Her initial shock transformed into practical support. She navigated hospital bureaucracy with the same efficiency she had once applied to charity galas. Her presence offered Julie moments of respite, shoulders to lean on when the weight of impending loss became too heavy. The apartment, maintained now by Julie with help from Emma's housekeeper, stood as a museum of their former life. Textbooks shared space with medical supplies, and calendar pages marked treatment schedules instead of school events. The small kitchen still held Hannah's coffee mug, unused but impossible to put away. During one particularly clear afternoon, Hannah had insisted on reviewing Julie's college applications. The forms lay spread across her hospital bed like battle plans, each one representing a future that Hannah had fought to make possible. Emma had quietly added several prestigious schools to the list, while Richard's pen had hesitated over the financial aid sections before completing them with firm strokes. The letters continued to accumulate. Hannah wrote through pain and medication, through good days and bad. Some pages bore tear stains, others held pressed flowers from the hospital garden. Each envelope contained pieces of Hannah's heart, carefully preserved for future moments she would never witness. Time moved with cruel efficiency. The doctors spoke in increasingly shorter terms, their professional optimism giving way to practical preparations. Julie had learned to read the medical charts, to understand the significance of each changing number. Her childhood ended not with celebration, but with the quiet acceptance of approaching loss. Richard's guilt manifested in practical gestures, trust funds established, educational opportunities secured. His corporate efficiency found purpose in creating safety nets for the daughter he had never known. Yet money, for all its power, could not slow the steady progression of Hannah's illness. Emma's presence had evolved from obligation to genuine connection. She shared quiet moments with Hannah, woman to woman, mother to mother. Their conversations, witnessed only by the steady rhythm of medical equipment, built bridges across the years of separation and social divide. The hospital room became a space where past and future collided, where relationships were rebuilt under the shadow of limited time. Hannah's bed formed the center of their newly reformed family constellation, her diminishing presence somehow making their connection stronger, even as she faded. Outside the hospital window, seasons began to change. The parking lot filled and emptied, shift changes marked the passage of days, and Hannah continued writing letters to a future she would not see. Julie watched it all with eyes that had aged years and months, holding her mother's hand as time cast its lengthening shadow over their remaining days together. The hospital garden had bloomed despite the approaching autumn, its flowers defying the cooling temperatures. Hannah's wheelchair left thin tracks in the morning dew as Julie guided her through the narrow paths. The garden had become their sanctuary, a small piece of life amid the sterile hospital corridors. Richard had arranged for a private gathering in the hospital's family room, his corporate influence securing them an afternoon of privacy. The space transformed under Emma's direction. Fresh flowers replaced generic artwork, and comfortable chairs replaced institutional furniture. The attempt to create warmth in a clinical setting highlighted both the effort and impossibility of making this situation normal. Hannah's medical file lay unopened on a side table, its contents now secondary to the stories that needed telling. Her voice, weakened by treatments and time, still carried the strength of 15 years of single motherhood. She shared moments Richard had missed: Julie's first steps, school plays, midnight fevers, and small triumphs. Each memory seemed to carve new lines in Richard's face. Emma sat close to Julie, their shoulders touching, as Hannah revealed the truth about those early college days. The story emerged not as a tale of villains and victims, but as a complex web of youth, fear, and circumstance. Richard's family pressures, Hannah's pride, and the suffocating weight of societal expectations had created a perfect storm of separation. The afternoon light filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the family room floor. Richard's public acknowledgement of Julie came not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments. The way he said her name, the protective stance he took when doctors entered, the familiar crease between his brows when she frowned. Nature had written his signature across her features too clearly to deny. Hannah watched the subtle dance of new relationships forming. Julie's initial resistance to Emma's kindness had melted into cautious acceptance. The designer handbag Julie had once viewed with resentment now served as a pillow during long hospital vigils. Emma's own children, though absent from this gathering, had begun asking about their new sister. The garden beckoned again as the room grew too full of emotion. They moved outside in pairs and groups, conversations splintering and reforming like the patterns of leaves overhead. Hannah's wheelchair found a sunny spot, her thin hands resting on the blanket Emma had brought from home, cashmere, but comfort transcended class. Richard's corporate mask had cracked completely, revealing the college student Hannah had known beneath decades of carefully constructed success. His hand shook slightly as he showed Julie old photographs he had kept hidden in his office drawer. Pictures of Hannah in the university library, young and unaware of the camera, preserved in secret through 15 years of silence. The shadows lengthened across the garden paths. Hannah's strength waned, but her eyes remained sharp, recording every interaction, every small gesture of emerging connection. The family they had become bore little resemblance to any of their expectations, yet somehow contained pieces of all their broken dreams. Julie's acceptance of her expanded family came in subtle shifts: the way she leaned into Emma's hugs, her growing comfort with Richard's presence, her ability to share stories of Hannah with these former strangers. The walls between their worlds had not disappeared, but had developed doorways, passages between different realities. As evening approached, Hannah's exhaustion became evident. The nurse arrived with medication, marking the end of their gathering. The farewell rituals had developed their own choreography: Emma's gentle kiss on Hannah's cheek, Richard's awkward but sincere hand on her shoulder, Julie's fierce embrace. The garden lay quiet in the fading light. Hannah's wheelchair left one final track through the dew as Julie guided her back inside. Behind them, Richard and Emma walked close together, their shadows merging on the pathway. The hospital resumed its normal rhythms around them, but something fundamental had shifted, like continental plates moving beneath still waters. Peace, Hannah realized, came not in dramatic declarations, but in small moments. The sound of Julie's laugh mixing with Emma's, the way Richard's hand steadied her wheelchair, the quiet acceptance of what was and what would be. The garden would continue to bloom, seasons would change, and the family they had pieced together would find its own way forward, carrying her stories with them. The October evening painted the hospital room in shades of amber, the setting sun casting long shadows across Hannah's bed. The medical equipment had been pushed aside, creating an illusion of home in the sterile space. Hannah's breathing had grown shallow, each rise and fall of her chest more deliberate than the last. The final letter lay unfinished on the hospital tray. Hannah's handwriting, barely legible but determined. Her fingers, now skeletal and bruised from IV lines, gripped the pen with fading strength. Julie sat close, memorizing her mother's face in the golden light, while Emma stood near the window, her usual composure softened by the weight of the moment. Richard had brought Hannah's old wooden writing box from the apartment, its surface worn smooth by years of use. Inside, the stack of completed letters represented a future mapped out in maternal foresight. Birthdays, graduations, heartbreaks, triumphs. Each envelope contained pieces of Hannah's heart, carefully preserved in ink and paper. The morphine drip marked time with steady drops, but Hannah fought against its sedating effects. Her last lessons emerged in whispered fragments, warnings about pride, advice about forgiveness, wisdom earned through years of solitary struggle. Julie absorbed each word like rain in desert soil, her hands never leaving her mother's. Emma moved quietly through the room, adjusting pillows and smoothing blankets with practiced care. Her own grief, unexpected in its intensity, showed in the trembling of her perfectly manicured hands. The social divide that had once seemed so vast had dissolved in these final hours, replaced by the universal language of loss. Richard stood at the foot of the bed, his corporate armor stripped away by the intimacy of death's approach. The young man who had once written love letters in a university library emerged in glimpses, in the way he touched Hannah's foot through the blanket, in his inability to meet Julie's eyes. His promises to Hannah carried the weight of 15 years of absence. The night shift nurses moved past the door with deliberate quietness, their routine checks softened out of respect. The room had taken on the hushed atmosphere of a sacred space, where time seemed to flow differently. Hannah's breathing created a rhythm that they all unconsciously matched, as if trying to hold on to each shared moment. Julie had grown older in these hospital months, her childhood ending not with celebration, but with the quiet acceptance of approaching loss. Her strength emerged not in dramatic gestures, but in small moments. The steady way she helped her mother sip water, her gentle voice reading from Hannah's favorite book, her ability to smile through tears. The final letter remained unfinished, but Hannah's lessons continued in silence. Her eyes tracked between Julie and her newly found family, watching the connections that had formed in the shadow of her illness. Emma's protective arm around Julie's shoulders, Richard's tentative fatherly concern, the foundation of care that would survive Hannah's absence. Night settled over the hospital, city lights replacing the sunset's glow. Hannah's breathing grew more labored, each breath a conscious effort. Julie had crawled onto the narrow bed, careful of the IV lines, her head resting on her mother's shoulder like she had done as a child. Emma's quiet tears fell in the darkness, while Richard's silhouette remained a steady presence against the window. The promise of protection passed between them without words. Emma's hand found Julie's in the dimness, while Richard moved closer to the bed, his successful life suddenly redefined by this moment of family unity. Hannah watched them through half-closed eyes, her last thoughts turning to the letters in the wooden box, her voice preserved for future moments she would never see.
Hey there, enjoying the story? Subscribe now, like and comment to catch all the upcoming emotions.
The night deepened and Hannah's breathing slowed. Julie's tears fell silently onto the hospital blanket, each drop carrying years of love and approaching loss. The room held them all in its quiet embrace. The dying mother, the grieving daughter, the reformed father, the unexpected guardian. Outside, the city continued its nighttime rhythm, unaware of the profound shift occurring in one small hospital room where a family forged in crisis faced its final transformation. 1 year after Hannah's passing, autumn had returned to the city. Julie stood in her new room in the Bennett house, surrounded by a strange mixture of her old life and new reality. Her mother's wooden writing box sat on a desk worth more than their old apartment's rent, the contrast a perfect metaphor for her transformed world. Her 16th birthday arrived with the weight of absence. The morning light filtered through expensive curtains, illuminating the envelope Hannah had marked specifically for this day. Julie's hands trembled as she broke the seal, recognizing her mother's deteriorating handwriting from those final hospital days. The letter's contents remained private, held close like a shield against the well-meaning celebration that would follow. Emma had arranged a family gathering, tasteful, understated, mindful of the complexity of the day. The guest list reflected Julie's bridged worlds, Richard's corporate associates' children mixed with her old friends from the apartment complex, their differences stark but somehow less important than they once seemed. Richard had changed in subtle ways over the past year. His corporate efficiency had softened around the edges, board meetings occasionally sacrificed for school events. He struggled with the role of father, every decision shadowed by 15 years of absence, but his effort showed in small, consistent ways. The crease between his brows, so like Julie's own, deepened whenever she mentioned Hannah. The celebration moved to Hannah's favorite place, the small park where she had taken Julie for ice cream after long hospital shifts. Emma had arranged for the aged bench to be restored, a small plaque added without fanfare. The autumn leaves fell around them as Julie shared stories of winter afternoons and summer picnics, each memory a thread connecting past to present. Julie's old apartment building stood vacant now, scheduled for renovation. She had visited once, standing in the empty rooms where Hannah had built their life. The worn linoleum and faded wallpaper held echoes of homework sessions, midnight conversations, and shared dreams. Emma had found her there, offering quiet company instead of attempted comfort. The day ended at the Bennett house, where Julie's two worlds continued their careful integration. Her old textbooks shared space with new ones. Hannah's coffee mug sat beside bone china teacups, and photographs of both families lined the walls. The arrangement felt neither forced nor natural, simply real, like grief itself. Richard's other children had adapted to their new sister with the resilient acceptance of youth. They asked about Hannah sometimes, curious about the woman who had shaped their sister's first 15 years. Julie shared carefully chosen stories, protecting some memories like precious stones, offering others as bridges between her past and present. Emma's role had evolved beyond simple guardian. She never attempted to replace Hannah, instead creating her own space in Julie's life. Her strength showed in different ways, in her fierce protection of Julie's privacy, her maintenance of connections to Julie's old neighborhood friends, her quiet acknowledgement of Hannah's continued presence in their lives. The wooden writing box still held several unopened letters, each marked with future dates: graduation, wedding, first child. Hannah's foresight had extended beyond her own life, leaving pieces of herself scattered through Julie's future like breadcrumbs through time. Each envelope represented both loss and connection, absence and presence. Night fell over the Bennett house, so different from the apartment where Julie had spent her first 15 birthdays. The city lights sparkled beyond her window, a view Hannah had never seen. In the quiet of her room, Julie reread her mother's birthday letter, letting the words wash over her like a familiar embrace. The future stretched ahead, neither entirely dark nor fully illuminated. Julie had learned to carry her mother's absence like a familiar weight, heavy but somehow essential. The family she had now, complex, imperfect, trying, existed because of Hannah's final act of love. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, in the space between what was and what would be, Julie held her mother's words close and faced forward into her 17th year.